Member engagement is one of the hardest things to measure, but you know when it's working and you know when it's not. I'm going to share with you some strategies to kick up and maintain member engagement. And remember, it's a journey. Member engagement requires constant attention and nurturing, and it's important to have the resources for this critical association work. For those of you who are regular attendees at our webinars, you know we host these webinars to give you timely, valuable information that you can take back to your association and use immediately. These webinars also give us an opportunity to help you see some of the work that we do, so when you're looking for help, you'll think of us. So, is member engagement the key to association sustainability? It is certainly one of the most important elements of sustainability. I mean, yes, if you are deeply struggling with your finances, maybe that's the first thing that you need to focus on. But unless you are dealing with a crisis, member engagement has to be one of the absolute top things that you're focused on. Member engagement can be excellent. It can be very poor. If it's very poor, it can be excellent. But remember, to keep it excellent requires constant work. So, member engagement matters really because at the end of the day, that's what keeps people coming to the association and keeps people renewing with your association. If you're engaged, you're going to be satisfied. It's going to be much easier to bring people in, and it's going to be much easier to keep people at the association as members. And keep in mind, and I'm going to make this connection very quickly, very early in this conversation, is volunteer attraction becomes much, much easier if you've got strong member engagement. But keep in mind, these are two sides of exactly the same coin. So when you're thinking about getting people more engaged, you're thinking about how do you measure how engaged people are, volunteerism is a huge part of this. So what does success look like? If we've got strong member engagement, what are the attributes of our organization? Well, for sure, you've got a strong volunteer pipeline. I can think of many organizations we've worked with over the years, over the last many decades. And when I think of those organizations that I know of that have a strong volunteer pipeline, in other words, they've consistently got more people who want to be volunteers than they've got positions for them. These are organizations that are consistently successful and sustainable. Whether it was the recession in 2008, 2009, whether it's through COVID, whether it's through what we're going through right now, they have been successful in every single environment you can imagine. Now, obviously, success also means that you've got strong member retention. If we're engaged, we're going to stay. And in addition, if we've got strong member engagement, we're going to have high event and program participation as well, too. And isn't that what we all want? We've got lots of volunteers. It means we can get lots done. Strong member retention is good for our footprint. It's good for our finances. And if we've got lots of people engaged in our events and programs, it means that what we're offering is resonating and it's of value to our membership. And that's all contributing to this thing that underpins everything that we do, which is our member value proposition. So today we're going to talk about engaging members. I'm going to give you some ideas in that regard, talking about engaging and motivating volunteers in particular. We're going to talk about recruiting volunteers, and then I'm going to give you some ideas for next steps. So what I'm encouraging you and challenging you to do today is look at the ideas I'm going to share with you. Just pick one, anyone that you think is going to bear the most fruit with the minimum amount of effort and get going on it immediately. You're probably going to have to clear something off your desk because if you're like everybody else, you've got too much on your desk as it is. Think about something you can park for a while you get this one thing done. And I guarantee if you pick any of these ideas, it will have a positive impact on the future and the presence of your organization. So let's talk about engaging members. I heard a question coming into this webinar, and we'll be discussing that in a little bit later when we get to the Q&A. But I hear this challenge a lot is we've got apathetic members. They are renewing. They're here for the organization, but when we ask for people to be on the board, nobody puts up their hand. I can't get people to volunteer. Why is it that we've got members, but they're paying their money to be members and they're still apathetic? Why is that, and how does that come about? Well, often it's just a question of, a level of engagement that isn't something that we can keep at a high level all the time. At any given time, we're going to be in a situation where the professionals that are in our association, the companies that are in our association, there's nothing really on the horizon that is hugely exciting or hugely terrifying. There's no quick wins to be had here. It is what it is. There's nothing that we're really scared about for the near term, and nothing that stops us from business as usual. And maybe with the organization, maybe there's a lack of leadership. Maybe there's a lack of leadership in the industry and the profession. Maybe we need better leadership in the organization itself. In other words, members tend to be apathetic because at this moment in time, there is no rallying point. In order for people to get excited, they need something to rally around. And, I don't want anyone to wish for a crisis, but let's face it, it is a reality that causes motivate. So if people have something that they can rally around, they are going to be more inclined to be engaged with the association, because the association actually provides the means to have that rallying point. You've got this ready-made group of people who share your interests, your concerns, and your goals, and you're going to be able to work with them to accomplish these things. So what we need then is an ongoing series of causes, not an ongoing series of crises, but crises may be some of those causes that come along on a regular, hopefully not too frequent basis. You want to figure out what those causes are that can be rallying points, figure out what they are, and that's going to be moment in time decisions. You can't pick what the cause is going to be 3 years from now, but you can pick what it is right now. What is the most engaging thing that is captivating the interest of your members at this moment? Now, once you figure that out, set short-term objectives, because remember, what keeps us motivated as human beings is short-term accomplishments. Putting one foot in front of the other, accomplishing that and moving on to the next thing gives us the energy to do the things that require a lot more work over a longer period. So make sure we've got short-term objectives. Now, when it comes to those causes or that cause, pick your leaders. Who can be the people in your membership that are really passionate about those goals, those concerns? They can help become that rallying point and the rallying cry that gets people engaged. Now, also keep in mind, it's not just a question of cynically finding a cause for people to rally around. We need to make sure that we're going to accomplish something here. And in order to do that, we need to provide them with resources. So don't just hand the cause over to somebody and say, hey, good luck with that. Make sure that they've got resources from the organization, whether that's support from organizational staff, whether it's money, whatever the resources are, make sure that they've got the resources in order to meet those short-term and long-term objectives. Also think about the fact that because people's energy does ebb and flow over time, think about how you're going to maintain that momentum over time. How can you do that? Obviously, the short-term wins are going to help with that, but is there a way that you can take people that are initially engaged in this way and segue them into something else when it's time for a change? Keep in mind, all of us, no matter how enthusiastic we are at any point in time, we need change over time. So make sure you're thinking about all of the committees and task forces that you've got, thinking about them strategically. Think about the end goal for that task or committee. What's the segue point? What can people do who join that committee to then move on to another committee or another cause or another task force, or maybe even the board itself? So causes motivate. Anytime you see a crisis coming up, you see a cause coming up, it might be something that you need to be worried about. It certainly may be something you need to take the opportunity for, but keep in mind, these are your sources, your most relevant and low-hanging fruit sources of member engagement. So keep an eye on those things and be strategic about them. Now, in terms of what's going on the backstage, think about what you're doing with respect to onboarding new members and renewing members, because keep in mind, this is an important part of member engagement. If you do a really good job of onboarding new members when they first become members, there's a much greater chance of them getting engaged, staying engaged, and being volunteers. Because remember, when you first made that decision to spend the money to be a member, that's probably when your enthusiasm is really at a peak. For some reason, you've decided this is an organization I need to be part of. Now make sure that the onboarding process makes them feel like they made the right decision. So keep in mind, whether it's onboarding or renewals, it is a process. And if it's a process, that means it's documented, and it means you're looking at it every year to figure out how well it worked for you and what you can do to tweak it for next year. Now, whether it's your onboarding process or your renewal process, one of the important elements that you need, one of the important pieces of collateral, is your event calendar. Now, a lot of people will say, well, I don't know what I'm going to be doing 12 months from now. How can I provide an event calendar? An event calendar tells members what you're planning on delivering for the upcoming year. So when I'm a new member, I'm being onboarded, you're going to get me excited about all the things you've got planned for the upcoming year. At the same time, when I'm contemplating whether to renew or not, If you give me an event calendar and say, here's all the great things we've got planned, it makes me more inclined to want to sign up again. So keep in mind, an event calendar isn't necessarily something that says, we're going to have this event on this date in this place. It's more saying, in the spring, we're going to be doing this, this, and this. In the fall, we're going to be doing this, this, and this. You don't need exact dates. You don't even need exact titles or speakers, but letting people know roughly what it is and why they should care. And by the way, if you're in the government relations / advocacy business, make sure that when you're onboarding and renewing people, they know what your priorities are for government relations and advocacy. Those are rallying points for them as well, too. And when it comes to your individual processes, your onboarding process is going to be different depending on the size of your membership. Now, if every year you get tens of new members, then by all means, you have the ability to reach out to them personally. And I definitely recommend a phone call. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get through to them, but if you can do your onboarding with them via telephone, that's a really great way to get engaged with them right away. Hey, thanks for joining. Here's some information. Can we set up a 10-minute phone call to go through onboarding with you and the rest of your team? Something along those lines. If nothing else, you can pick up the phone and leave a message welcoming them and encouraging them to pay attention to these events that are coming up in the next couple of months. Now, if you've got a large membership and you've got literally hundreds and hundreds of new members joining every year, maybe a phone call to everyone is not going to be a possibility, but a phone call to some of the key players, some of the ones that maybe took a long time to say yes, some of the ones that might have said yes but are still at risk. Use your phone calls. You can still do it, not with everyone, but you can still do it to some of the key members. And keep in mind, maybe this is going to be a multi-year process if you've got a large membership. But if you've got a large membership and phone calls just aren't in the cards, what about snail mail? Is there a nice looking onboarding package you can send to them that they're going to actually receive in the post? In the old days, everybody did this and it wasn't much of a novelty. But now that most of us don't receive much mail anymore, maybe that's an option. But it is expensive. So for large memberships, it might be that maybe that's a point of pushback because we just don't have the revenue in order to spend it on packages. Well, at the very least, if you've got a huge membership and you don't have much money at all, if nothing else, you can put together an onboarding video. And when you send the email to them that says, welcome, we're so glad you're here, there's an onboarding video that tells them how to get the most bang for their buck out of their membership. If it's there, you can use it in many different ways. And often you can use your onboarding video also as a recruitment video as well, too. So if you've got little time and little money, see what you can do something that you can get maximum value on more than one front that you can reuse for different purposes. Now, when it comes to your renewal process, just think about a couple of things that you can do to provide incentives for people to renew. One thing that I find is really helpful, if you regularly raise your member dues every year by the cost of living, and if you don't, I encourage you to really give some thought to doing that because it's a relatively painless way to make sure that your member fees keep up with the cost of living. If you're doing that, or even if you do increase your fees, but on a less regular basis, when it comes time for renewal, give people an opportunity to get in at last year's price. If you renew before such and such a date, in other words, if you renew before you actually have expired, we'll get you in at last year's price. Now, it's true that for a lot of people, they would have renewed anyways. So why should I give them a discount if they were going to renew anyways? For the most part, it's not a big discount you're giving them, and it can have a big impact on the resources that you're actually using to track down those late payors. If I've got an incentive to pay early, then that gives you an opportunity to get my money in the door faster, which helps with cash flow. And it also means that you and the rest of the staff are doing less chasing up to get me to renew. That is a huge source of resources that often suck the life right out of the tent at certain times of the year, just chasing after those people over and over again. Yes, I know you're going to renew, but every year it takes me 2 months of chasing to bring you in. Getting you in at last year's price can often help. Also think about, you want to make sure they're engaged, and you also want to give them a financial incentive to renew as quickly as possible. Think about giving them a special deal on an upcoming event, something a little bit better than the member's price, maybe a bundle that gives them that and a little something else. Maybe there's a new program you're trying to promote. Give them a reason to renew on time, and make sure that there's some financial incentive for those that are going to be motivated by that. Now, keep in mind, and this is very important to remember, if your members have their member fees and or their events covered by their employer, that is probably not going to work, because it's not going to be a financial incentive to them. It's a financial incentive to their employer. And sure, they care about their employer and all that, but they're not going to get a pat on the head from their supervisor if they save $30 on next year's membership. So if you've got members that are companies, don't waste a whole lot of time on those kinds of financial incentives. Think about the kinds of incentives that are actually going to accrete directly to the member themselves. Now, let's talk about recruiting volunteers. Remember, we said earlier that volunteers are our most engaged kind of member. So what we need to do is we need to make sure we have as many people who want to be volunteers as possible. And that's not just because that means engaged members. Yes, volunteers are engaged members, but just having that pipeline of potential volunteers means we can get a whole heck of a lot more done, which increases our member value proposition, which increases our value to members, which increases member engagement, which in turn increases our number of volunteers. So what do we need in order to make sure that we've got a good, strong pipeline of people who want to become volunteers? First of all, active hands-on recruitment is critical. Yes, you can do a call out, and if you literally have a lineup of hundreds of people who want to be volunteers, maybe all you need to do is actually send out an email. But for the rest of us who don't have that wonderful advantage, active hands-on recruitment is really a great way to go. And really what that amounts to is reaching out directly to individuals and say, I think you would be great for this, and here's why. Now, when you're trying to figure out who you should actually be reaching out to, if you've got anybody that makes a point of reaching out to the association on a regular basis, that is a good prospect for a volunteer. Now, maybe when they're reaching out, it's to get information, it's constantly asking questions. And in other words, taking advantage of their membership. That's the kind of person you definitely want to have volunteer. Also, squeaky wheels. Maybe you've got people who on a regular basis pick up the phone or send an email saying, you're doing this totally wrong, or why aren't you doing more of this, or how did you miss the boat on this? It's tempting to look at that and going, why are they on my case all the time? Why are they always complaining? But remember, the fact that they're complaining means they're engaged. And if they're complaining, it means they want something to be done. And that's a great opportunity to say, thanks so much for all your great ideas, Ruth. You are awesome. What I'd really love to see happen is, could you come on board? Could you join this task force or committee? And then we can work with you to help to make that happen. By joining it and by volunteering, you're going to be great for this. And I know we can make some improvements here. So think about the people that you're regularly in contact with that aren't volunteers and how you can get them into that pipeline. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit more about this later, but think about the leadership opportunities. When you are pitching for volunteerism, you are arguably pitching a leadership career path. And that's something that is important to emphasize to the people you're talking to. You know, there's a lot of people who are members of organizations that don't get a lot of opportunity in their regular day-to-day career life for leadership. There's just a lot of us who don't see that in their regular day-to-day. So for them, for that person, leadership opportunities are a novelty. There's something new. It's a new method of learning, and it's something that may help them with their day-to-day career, or might just help them in their regular life. I mean, let's face it, learning leadership skills can even help us deal with relatives in our family. So leadership opportunities are something to pitch. You know, join this committee. You'll get to learn how to work within a committee. You can then maybe move your way up to chair of that committee. From there, you might want to get on the board of directors. From there, you might become the chair of the board of directors. Get people thinking that way, that this is just potentially a step in a longer pathway. And it's entirely up to me. I don't have to do that, but I could do that. Also pitch them on making new contacts. You know, if you would join a committee, even if you never choose to become chair, you're going to make new contacts, you're going to expand your network, you're going to expand your influence, and you're probably going to make friends at the same time. So think about the human reasons why someone might choose to join a committee and pitch those human reasons. Also, keep in mind, as you're making your pitch, think about demographics. Now, what we have learned with anecdotal information, it's true. I don't know that we've actually got hard, solid, empirical evidence of this, but I've sure seen a lot of anecdotal evidence that tells us that once people become volunteers, they tend to stay volunteers. Generally speaking, when people start volunteering with an organization, they just keep volunteering in one role or another, and they will probably be a volunteer on a regular on and off basis throughout their entire period as members of the organization. So when you think of it that way, If you're recruiting somebody in their 30s to be a volunteer, you may very well have decades of volunteerism from that person going forward. So think about it. The younger you recruit them, the longer you're going to have them. So that's not to say that you want to not recruit older people to be volunteers. Often that level of experience and leadership that they've already got can be hugely valuable in recruiting others. But do think about your demographics. Now, when it comes to recruiting volunteers and getting that pipeline together, remember, this is a marketing and a sales activity, recruiting volunteers. It's just like anything else. Effectively, you are selling people on the idea that it's going to be good for them to be a volunteer. You're explaining what's in it for them. In order to do good marketing and sales, you always need, what do you need? You need a target list. And a target list has actual people's names on it that you've put there for some reason because you think they're going to be good volunteers either now or at a future point in time. Now, in order to put your target list together, you need to be thinking about who the people are that are going to be on that target list. So think about diversity. Now, when I say that, I'm using diversity in all senses of the word. You want diversity in terms of demographics. So you want your 30-year-olds, your 40-year-olds, your 20-year-olds, etc. You want diversity of demographics. You want diversity of thought and experience. What are the different types of experience you need to recruit with your volunteers? What are different levels within their career? That is diversity as well, too. That's going to help you put together a really good target list. And you want to nurture and cultivate that target list so that you've got lots of volunteers in your pipeline and you know who you want to tap next. Keep in mind, you don't want to wait until you've got a hole on a committee before you reach out to the first person with a beating heart and try to mash them together. You want to make sure that you're doing a good job of fit. So you want to make sure you're doing direct personal outreach and you're making sure that you're really understanding where an individual who you think is going to be a good volunteer is going to enjoy it the most and be able to contribute the most, because that's going to keep them coming back as a volunteer. Now, I want to share with you some survey results. I can't let you know which organization did this survey because it was an internal survey when I was working with them. And this was the information that we came up with. Now, I will share with you that they are a professional organization in the healthcare sector. And one of the questions that they were asked is, what do you find as the personal value of volunteering or maybe the professional value of volunteering? What I thought was really interesting and not surprising, but interesting and illuminating is it gave me a much better understanding of the association. I heard people say, I had no idea we did all this until I became a volunteer. I had no idea that we provided all this value to members. And you know what? The reality is, it doesn't matter how many emails you send out to members, they are going to miss half of them and the other half are going to go in one ear and out the other. It's only the odd few that we as human beings are actually going to act on. So what it means is the vast majority of our members really don't know a whole heck of a lot of what we do. So by making them volunteers, they have a better understanding of the association. And I want to add there a better appreciation of the association, which makes them more likely to be even more engaged members. So that's huge in itself. Just by bringing people into the volunteer, into your group of volunteers, they are going to value the association more. Now, here's a few other things that I thought were really interesting, because these are very human things that we're looking at here. They said there's camaraderie that I'm getting by being a volunteer, friendship. I'm meeting new people. I've got a sense of belonging. I've got a support system. I'm working with people to be part of something bigger. It means that we're not alone. We've got that sense of belonging. We're making new friends. It's something that makes us happy to be a volunteer. It's not just that we're giving back. And yes, for many of us, that's why we're volunteering, but it actually makes us happy to be there. We feel good about being there. And it's not just because of the good deeds we're doing by being a volunteer. It's because of the people connections we're making by doing that. And one more thing, we're learning new skills. At a minimum, we're learning leadership skills. And that's why it's so important, and we'll talk about this in a minute, it's so important to make sure that you are giving your volunteers the tools that they need in order to be really good at what they're doing. Learning new skills is something that most engaged and ambitious people are interested in, from the cradle to the grave, learning new skills. So if you can make sure that your volunteers are getting that, it's going to be even more rewarding for them to step up to the plate for that. Now, speaking of human needs and how volunteers and associations can help that brings us back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Now, for those of you who have taken Psychology 101, you've probably been exposed to this Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Maslow was an American psychologist that was probably active in the 30s through the 60s, and he came out with this pyramid. And the general concept is that you need to have accomplished one level of the pyramid before you can move up. So in other words, if I don't have food on the table and I don't have a roof over my head, I am not thinking about self-actualization. I've got to get a whole lot more things under my belt before I'm ready for that. But if you look above that, safety, a sense of belonging, being esteemed by colleagues, self-actualization, these are all things that associations can provide. Sometimes just with the membership. Sometimes we help to provide safety just by membership in the organization. And these things like belonging, esteem, and self-actualization definitely come through volunteerism. And we saw that in the survey results. Look at these things that are highlighted in yellow. These are all human needs that are being satisfied by volunteerism. I mean, how cool is that? Now, once we've got these volunteers, they are in our pipeline, they've now worked their way onto our committees and task forces. What do we do about engaging and motivating them? Because remember, we've got the possibility to keep these volunteers literally for decades. So what are we going to do? We talked about this earlier. We are going to train them. Why do we train volunteers? For a couple of reasons. First of all, volunteers want to feel like they know what they're doing. Nobody wants to feel stupid. We all hate that. And in fact, we tend to run away from anything that's going to make us feel stupid. So let's make sure that we can avoid that at all costs. Make sure that as soon as a new volunteer joins, they get some training immediately and ongoing training. What are the kind of things we need to train the volunteers for? Well, first of all, remember we said earlier, we want to coach them in what the volunteer leadership pipeline looks like. You know, you can start here and you can end up being chair of the board. That's an important thing for them to know as they are being recruited. Now that they've been recruited and you're training them, they need to understand the governance of the committee that they're part of. How does the hierarchy work here? What's our mandate? What are we here to do? What are we here to accomplish? What are our goals for this particular year? Remember those short-term wins we want to make sure each committee gets, make sure everybody understands that and they're working toward those goals. How do things work with the committee? What's its relationship to the board? What's its relationship to the staff? Who are the people that I need to know what their roles are, both on the staff and on the board? And also, whether or not it's directly related to the committee that I'm on, you need to make sure as a volunteer, I'm being coached in what the member value proposition is for the organization. These are things that every volunteer needs to be able to rattle off with their own narrative very easily. Because when maybe I'm meeting a volunteer for the first time, I've just bumped into them at an industry event. And I'm saying, why should I bother being part of that association? You don't want your volunteers to stumble and go, oh, gee, I'd have to think about that. Let me get back to that. Let me get back to you tomorrow on that. No, you want them to be able to articulate it very quickly and honestly to have their own personal narrative to wrap around that member value proposition. So make sure that's part of their training. Also make sure that they are feeling connected with other volunteers. Remember what we talked about earlier, that human element, a feeling of belonging, making friends, camaraderie, being part of something bigger. The faster you can make that connection for them so that they feel that they're part of something bigger, they've got people they can pick up the phone to, they can email, they can connect with at an event. Make sure that you are helping to make those connections. And make sure that your chair and your CEO are actively involved in that. It doesn't take a lot for between the chair and the CEO to reach out once a year to every single volunteer and to thank them. Even if they're sending, or maybe they're sending an email at midnight on a Monday night, it doesn't take a lot to get through to everybody at least once a year. And between the two of you, you can do that. Make sure people are feeling valued by the leadership of the organization itself. Now, also keep in mind that if I've joined a committee, I've joined it because I want to make something happen, damn it. I'm here to do something. So when I join a committee, I want to have a feeling that this is managed in a professional manner, that I know what I'm supposed to be doing. I've had the training. I know how to get there. Let's make sure that we're managing our committees to maximize results. If we maximize results, it's not only great for the organization because a lot is getting done, but we're also making the people that are on those committees feel really good about being part of those committees. So make sure that each committee has something that they can accomplish within the next 12 months. Whatever happens, however long you're on that committee, within 12 months, you will have accomplished something that you can say you feel good about. So make sure that you've given them a path to ensure wins on that committee. make sure, and we'll talk about recognition in a minute, make sure that there's an opportunity for them to get recognition from their peers, and that you've talked to them about that volunteer career path we were talking about earlier, so that when they're on that committee, they're thinking, oh, how does the chair run this committee? Could I do as good a job as that? Could I do a better job of running this committee? Maybe I've got some ideas for staff as to how they could support this committee to get more out of the committee. Make sure they're thinking in their head about that career path, whether it's something they want or not, make sure they're aware of it. Now, there's a fine line in terms of supporting volunteers. I find that we tend to go in one direction or the other without often finding that happy medium. In some cases, we say to the committee, great, here's your mandate, off you go, and come back to us when it's done. And people don't know what they're doing. They often can get themselves and the organization into trouble. They just didn't have enough oversight, and they really didn't understand what was theirs to decide and what were the things they needed to bring back to the board. So we don't want rogue committees. At the other end of the spectrum, often we spoon feed them and we micromanage them way too much. What we should be doing is we should be giving them accountability, but not sitting there at every step of the way with them. So we want to have self-management when it comes to committees. We want committees deciding what their agenda needs to be, as long as they know what their mandate and what they need to accomplish. You want them to have support from the staff, but at the same time, you don't want the staff doing their work. You don't want a committee who feels that their role is simply to come up with new ideas for work for the staff to do. Staff has already got enough work. If we want new ideas and staff have to be involved, then we need to figure out what is going to be taken off the staff's plate in order for them to do that. So really, in order for committees to have real influence and to be of value, which is what we all want as human beings, being on a committee, you as staff need to be there to some extent and also stay away to some extent. So find that happy medium. Now, we talked earlier about recognition, and this is important. We want to make sure that we are giving recognition to people who are really stepping up to the plate to be volunteers, whether it's volunteerism over a long period of time, whether it was volunteerism when we really needed it for a really tough topic. Make sure we're figuring out how to recognize people. Now, if you call me and I'm a volunteer and I get a call from the chair or the CEO and they say, thanks, Erin, you did a great job, that makes me feel good. That's very nice. But you know what I like even more is if I'm recognized in front of my peers, that makes me feel even better. You know, there I am standing up, getting an award, getting thanked, and all my peers are going, yeah, Erin, you know, she's doing a really good job. She's obviously doing a good job for the membership organization, and she's helping me out as a member. Thanks very much, Erin. That makes me feel good. If I'm an employee at a member organization, making sure my supervisor or my manager and my HR director know about what I'm accomplishing as well too. Maybe that means somebody at work is going to say, wow, Erin's doing a lot of volunteering. She seems to be in leadership roles. Maybe we should be thinking about a promotion opportunity for Erin. So think about how we can do that, broadening the field of recognition. So I'm not just being recognized with a phone call, I am being recognized or just to the membership. I'm being recognized to my peers, to the people who manage me, and potentially to the public as well too. Just keep one thing in mind. Before you advertise an award or a recognition to people's managers or to the public or to their peers, make sure they're on board with making that happen. Sometimes people might say, you know, I'm not so sure I want you to tell my manager that I'm involved in volunteering, because they might figure I'm taking too much time away from my job in order to do that. So make sure you get their approval first before you decide how you're going to recognize them. Finally, let's talk about recruiting members. It's an important consideration to be thinking about how we're using our member engagement in order to recruit members. Because remember, the more engaged our members are, the easier it is to recruit new members. Word of mouth alone will really help in that regard. There's really only two reasons why we join associations, and that is, number one, because the organized mandate resonates with me. This is something that I feel needs to be done, and I can't do it on my own. I want an association to be able to support that mandate. Typically, that's why we join an organization. That tends to be what brings us in. The other reason why we join an organization is because I feel I'm going to be around other people that share my interests, that share my values. And what keeps us there is because I've now met those people. They are my colleagues, they are my friends, and I enjoy interacting with them. It's number two that generally helps keep members with the organization. So really, in terms of recruiting members, It all comes down to knowing and sharing your member value proposition. If you haven't taken the time to really nail this down, sit down and do it. It is a process. It's not going to be done in 30 minutes. I would allow at least a good half day, and that's assuming that you've got some help with it. If you don't have help, then it's going to take a little bit longer, but it does take resources and it does take time. So make sure you've allowed the time to make this happen. This shouldn't be anecdotal. It should be something that you use anecdotes to create a very clear narrative and an explicit statement of what your member value proposition is. Now, when it comes to recruiting members, yes, you can do e-blast to the world, and not to say that you shouldn't, as long as you're not violating privacy rules. But active hands-on recruitment usually is the thing that bears the most fruit. So what you really want is you want your members to be helping you to recruit others. Focus on circles of influence. You can't phone up every person who might potentially be a member, but you can contact people that are members and have circles of influence, or aren't members and have circles of influence. If you've got somebody that is running teams, that is actively involved in other organizations, has a leadership role in the profession or in the industry, those are the people you want to reach out to first. Because when other non-members see that they are members, they are more likely to become members, because everyone wants to belong to a group that the key people are belonging to. That sense of belonging, we want to be where the cool kids are. We want to be in that good spot in the playground. So if we advocate to people with circles of influence to become members, that in itself is going to bring other people in. So let's just do a quick recap about what we've talked about. We've talked about engaging members, engaging and motivating volunteers, recruiting volunteers, and recruiting members. In terms of some of the tips that we provided, focusing on a cause is great. If you've got a crisis, and hopefully you don't, but if you do end up with a crisis, use it as a rallying opportunity to get members engaged. If you don't have a crisis, that's good. Focus on a cause. What can be a rallying point to get people more involved? Think about what your onboarding and your renewal process looks like. First of all, is it written down? If it's not, that's a really good first step. Now let's figure out how we can make it better. Think about it from the perspective of the person at the other end. Is the way you're trying to renew my membership making me feel good, or is it just annoying me? When you onboard me, does that make me feel good about my decision, or does it make me feel like you're just ignoring me now that you got my money? Think about the tips that we gave you to build your volunteer pipeline. Remember, training is important. Make sure fit is important. That you're recruiting people who have a good fit for the hole you're trying to fill on a committee or a task force. There's got to be a synergy and a connection there. Make sure your volunteers are getting the right training so that they feel not only can they walk into the job knowing what to do right away, but there's a potential career path that they can fulfill for themselves in terms of leadership. And then finally, remember what your member value proposition is, and make sure you've got this documented and every single volunteer understands it. So in terms of your next steps, I encourage you to look at all of the ideas you've got from this particular webinar and think about one step you can take away. You might want to consider reassessing the process that you use for member onboarding and renewing. What about how you volunteer, how you onboard your volunteers or train your volunteers? Could you be doing more there? What about building your volunteer pipeline? Could you be doing more there? Imagine if you had people lining up to be volunteers, more volunteers that you could possibly use at each moment in time. If you've already got that, awesome. Great for you. And for those of you that don't, you can get there too. And remember to articulate your member value proposition. So whatever you choose, get started right away. And if you have to park something, you have to take something off your desk to make that happen, do it. Anything you do here is going to take you a big step forward. Now, if you want some help with your member engagement, maybe with your member value proposition, you know where to find us. We'd be happy to help. Now, I know that we've got some live questions. Kevin, why don't you start us off?
Sure, Erin. So first question is, what is the best way to show appreciation to members who are engaged?
Okay, great question. We talked about recognition earlier, and there's different ways to show appreciation. Obviously, a shout out from the chair, from the CEO, thanking people personally really does help. And by the way, when you do that personal outreach and say, hey, Ruth, thanks so much for being a member. I really appreciate it. Make it personal. Ruth, one of the things that's so great about having you as a volunteer is you make everybody else feel like they really have a lot to offer. You really manage to connect with people. or Ruth, I just love the knowledge you have about our profession. You are just such a source of information and inspiration and knowledge. Pick out something that really is relevant about them and about their volunteerism that really matters. Make that connection real. And then public recognition. This is really important as well, too. You know, whoever you are, whatever you do, if you can describe yourself as an award-winning something, I am an award-winning researcher, I'm an award-winning consultant, I'm an award-winning dentist. Whatever this is, being able to say you're award-winning means something. So make sure that when you recognize people, you're recognizing them to their peers as well, too. Maybe to clients. Maybe give them a way to use that recognition. I often find that sometimes people and companies win awards and they think that's great, and then they don't do anything with it. I mean, if you're a company and you've won an award, you might want to put it on your website. And sometimes your members need some help explaining to them how they can get additional value out of those awards. Kevin, what's our next question?
Our next question is, how can you do member engagement in a big way when there's only one of you running the association?
Yeah, that is a great question. And what you need when there's just one of you, well, you always need leverage, but you especially need it when there's only one of you. So let's think about this. You want members to be engaged, but there's only one of you. And you're spending a whole heck of a lot of your time doing stuff. A lot of that stuff is backstage stuff that your members never even see, but it's got to be done, and it's got to be done efficiently. What I encourage you to do is start with two things. First of all, what can you automate? I often find that if you're a one-person show, it may be because your organization is surviving on a shoestring and they've only got enough money to hire one person. Fair enough. Probably means they don't have a lot of money for other things as well, too. But where this often manifests itself wrongly is, well, we don't have much money and I'm the CEO, so I'm going to do this by hand, because if I'm going to buy that piece of software, it's going to cost $300 a month. And boy, that's a lot of money. But think about what you could be doing with your time on member engagement if you weren't running that Excel spreadsheet instead of a member management system. Think about that. What can you automate? What can you automate from a bookkeeping perspective? So think about all the things for which there is software that can automate things, online payments, event management, all these kinds of things. You know, we don't sell association management systems and we don't endorse association management systems. That's not part of what we do. But I do encourage you, however small you are, to get one. Because if you've got more than 30 members, it's probably going to save you time. The other thing to think about, if there's only one of you, again, it comes down to volunteer recruitment. Because if you've got a good pipeline of volunteers that can really help get stuff done, then that means there's more time to work on member engagement. So two things that I suggest if you're on your own: automate what you can from a back end perspective, and that's going to mean spending some money. So think about where that money is going to come from. Try to increase your volunteer base so that you can get more done with just the one of you. Yeah, I can think of a great example of an association I used to belong to and is nothing like it was before. But the way it was before is it was a one-man show, but that one-man show had a whole lot of volunteers that did an awful lot of the running of the organization, which meant that that one-person staff could actually get out and make members feel good, get engaged, make them feel like that the CEO really cared about them, wanted them to belong. And that really made that organization successful. And what allowed the CEO to do that was volunteerism. Also, keep in mind, you don't have a lot of time in the day, but have a list, have a call list of members you're going to call, and work your way through the list one step at a time when you've got a moment. Got 3 minutes, pick up the phone, do some outreach to a member, then go to the next person on the list when you have a little bit more time. What's our next question, Kevin?
Next question is, do you have any feedback regarding any customer relationship management platforms for associations that provide membership sales tracking, newspaper or newsletter creation, event management?
Good point. And that's really a nice segue from, you know, how do you manage if you're a one-person show? Yeah, I strongly recommend getting an association management system. Some, you know, often they're called customer relationship management systems. Association management systems that are purpose-built to manage organizations, I find, are more helpful because you're not trying to put a square peg into a round hole. There's plenty of association management systems out there in all different price ranges. And they are better or worse depending on what you're trying to accomplish. I can give you some feedback on CMSs that we have used internally, but that's not to say there aren't others out there that might be better or worse for that matter. We have used Memby, which has the advantage of being, it's an entry priced system, has the advantage of being inexpensive. But correspondingly, there are fewer things that you can do on the automation side. We've also used Wild Apricot, which is kind of a step above in price and functionality, and also Member 365, which is again another step up, allows you to do more and correspondingly costs more. So those are three that we have used. If you've got the money of those three, I would prefer using Member 365 because it's just easier to use, has more automations, and it has more features, but it does cost more money. What's our next question, Kevin?
Next question is, how do you engage members who pay fees annually as a practice but are not otherwise engaged with the association?
This is a really good question, and something that a lot of associations struggle with. I know many associations that'll say, we've had people that have been members for years and they don't attend any events. They don't use any of our programming. I don't understand why they're even a member. Sometimes people are getting benefit that you just don't see, and that's all the benefit that they need to actually renew. Maybe those are the people that are actually reading the emails that you're sending out. Maybe those are people that are actually tap into your resources from time to time, maybe not frequently, but when they do tap into your resources, it's when they really, really need it. So keep in mind, just because they are not visibly engaged doesn't mean they are not adequately engaged for their own purposes. So just because they're not obviously engaged, you shouldn't assume they are an at-risk member. But I think it's probably appropriate that when you have members that aren't engaged, you should be treating them as an at-risk member and trying to connect with them. There's no harm in picking up the phone and saying, hey, I see you're not taking advantage of any of our programs. Is it because you have different needs? Is there something maybe we could do for you? You might find that this person is part of a group that's part of your group because there's no group for them. And maybe what you could do is create a special interest group within your membership organization that could actually attract a lot more people. So getting the opportunity to speak to those people could be really, really helpful. The other thing to keep in mind too is if you have members who are companies and you find you've got a member company, maybe there's just somebody, in the finance department that just automatically pays that fee every single year, but you don't have people at that company that are actively involved. Consider getting more contacts at the company. It's not just the person that pays the bill, but if you have members that are corporate, you want to make sure you've got as many of their employees who are engaged with the organization as possible. So get more names and more contact information if that's the case.
All right, thank you, Erin. Next question is kind of related. We have members that just come for one discount that our membership provides. How do we get them to actually participate in the association?
Yeah, Kevin, you're right. I mean, it's the same answer as the previous question. It may be that that's all they want. Maybe you're giving them a great discount on their professional liability insurance. They have to buy professional liability insurance and you've got the best price. In that case, they've got everything that they came for. And as long as you've got insurance, you're going to still have them. But I get where you're coming from, because what happens if that deal isn't as good next year? What happens if someone else comes along with the same deal? Then potentially we could use a huge percentage of our membership. So you're right. You definitely do want to get them engaged. So try to connect with them. Try to find out what it is that would make them see value in other areas of what you're offering to them. And again, if it is a company, try to get more contacts.
Next question is, what you put in is what you get out of associations, but if members are too busy to be engaged, how do we demonstrate value?
Right. Okay. I just want to touch on the phrase too busy. You know how, when you were a teenager and somebody broke up with you and said, it's not you, it's me. It was you. They broke up with you because they didn't want to be with you anymore. And often when a member says, well, I'm too busy, I didn't renew my membership because I'm just too busy to get engaged, or I'm not engaged because I'm just too busy. Too busy doesn't really mean much. We're all busy. And in fact, most of us are too busy. But the reality as human beings, we find time for stuff we want to do. We always do. No matter how busy we are, we will find time for the stuff we really want to do. So I think often too busy means I'm just not interested. It's kind of, there's nothing you're offering which is intriguing me or making me want to get more involved. So I think if you read too busy as not interested, maybe that's going to lead you in the right direction to try to find things that are going to make those people more interested. Try to find out a little bit more about them, find out if they've got something in common. And also consider, sometimes when people say they're too busy and it really means they're not interested, they actually might be a great candidate for a volunteer. It might be that they're looking, or they haven't known they wanted it, but they might actually want leadership training. They might want an opportunity to get better at being a leader. They might want to meet new contacts. Maybe they are in a business where they need to expand their contacts, and it never occurred to them that rather than doing cold calls, a better and easier thing to do might be to be a volunteer. So just because people say they're too busy doesn't mean you shouldn't try to recruit them as volunteers.
Right, thanks, Erin. And how do we deal with apathy amongst the membership?
Yeah, well, yeah, and that's kind of back to the same questions that we've been asking earlier. One of the easiest ways to do this is when you've got a cause to rally them around. Make sure that when there's a cause out there, there's a change in the industry or profession, or a pending change in the industry or profession, rally around that cause. Get people involved. Find the people that are the most passionate about that particular cause and give them a leadership role in terms of being the rallying point around that. Also, again, back to the point where somebody says, I'm too busy, use it as an opportunity to recruit volunteers, because with apathy, where are we on that Maslow's hierarchy of needs? Do we have a sense of belonging? Maybe that's what we need. Maybe that's how we can cope with apathy. And maybe having that sense of belonging might actually be getting them onto a committee.
Thank you, Erin. Just a couple of questions that were entered into the chat. The first one is, I like the idea of providing financial incentives for paying membership dues before X or Y dates. But if paying before X or Y date allows members to pay into their membership at last year's rates, how do you break that cycle when a rate increase is actually needed?
Yeah, that's a really good point. Keep in mind that there's going to be lag time anyways. This isn't going to stop the rate increase from actually happening. It's just going to cause the take up to not be 100% in the first year. If you understand what I mean, like if you are increasing your rates every single year by the cost of living, and you have, let's say, 30% of people choose to renew at last year's rates, that means that 30% of your members are not going to be paying this year's rate, but they are going to be paying last year's rate. So remember, you only got one shot at last year's rate. By the time next year comes around, it's still going to be last year's rate, but it's going to be what was last year, this year's rate. You know what I'm saying? You're going to get them on board eventually. And what I also find with this is it is an incentive. But I often find that you don't necessarily get a huge take up. You get enough to make a difference, so it's definitely worth doing. But I've never had an organization say, oh my God, that was terrible. We gave everybody the opportunity to renew at last year's rate, and 99% of them did. So we got no increase at all this year. At a minimum, you're going to be getting an increase next year. That's going to happen. So it's just a question of timing. But is absolutely a valid question. I've just never found that it had a meaningfully negative financial impact.
Right, and the last question is there a good repository of available vacant volunteer positions? Maybe some suggested sites?
What I think the question is, Kevin, and correct me if I'm wrong, is where can I go to find out opportunities to volunteer? Is that fair?
Um, that does appear to be what the attendee or this participant is saying. But if I have it wrong, please to this participant, please message us to let me know.
Okay. Well, let's say that I want to volunteer. Well, first of all, do you belong to any associations? If you do belong to any associations, that's a great starting point. So reach out to the association, say, I'm interested in being part of a committee or a task force. Here's the kinds of things I'm interested in, and here's the kind of talent I've got where I feel I can contribute. Don't send it, just to a generic email address. Find out where the recruitment area is for volunteers for your particular association. Reach out, tell them something about yourself, tell them something about what you're interested in. And if you are looking for leadership opportunities, make sure you tell them that as well too. So if you are a member of an association, definitely reach out to do that. Now, the other area on a regular basis, and I try to share these whenever I have the opportunity, Often organizations will post when they're looking for volunteers they'll post on LinkedIn. I don't see a lot of recruitment for committees and task forces on LinkedIn, but certainly for director positions. And often when they're recruiting on LinkedIn, they're recruiting director positions that mean you don't have to be a member. They might be looking for a particular type of skill. So LinkedIn is a good source for that as well too. LinkedIn and your association for sure. And then from time to time, there's other opportunities through social media. Watch the posts that are coming out of other associations and follow them.
Thanks, Erin. That was the final question that we had.
Wonderful. Okay. Well, if you'd like a copy of the slides, please reach out. Keep an eye on our YouTube channel. We record all of these webinars for future viewing. If you get an invitation from us and you can't attend, sign up anyways. We will always send a recording to anybody who registers for the event. And we've got an upcoming webinar on March 7th. The CEO and the board building and maintaining a thriving relationship. This is absolutely critical for a successful organization, and Kevin is going to be following up with you after this webinar. We'd love your feedback, any topics you'd like us to cover, any challenges you'd like us to help with, please just reach out to us, and we'd love to hear from you. That concludes our webinar. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next month.